Story 1. Salasio. I don't know where to start. I mean, the beginning is the obvious choice, but I don't think there is a discernible point where that is either. All I know is that the nightmares began about 3 months ago. They have altered my perception of reality to the extent that now, as I write this down, I have no idea if I am waking or dreaming. There is one thing I can be sure of. Michael James is a monster, and I can't trust him. 3 months ago, a man came into my art gallery. He had sullen features, a long boss, high beard, and paint stains all over his clothes. He looked at me oddly, and then asked if he was able to get an exhibition slot sometime within the next few weeks. I informed him that we had a slot opening the next week on Friday, but that it would only be enough space for 5 pieces. He looked pleased and then introduced himself as Michael James. He explained that he was a photographer and graphic artist, that he took photos and manipulated them using Photoshop and other programs to make them appear more gruesome or macabre. His exact wording was to show people what's really on the inside. I was intrigued, so I asked him if he could do one of me. He laughed, but then took a photo nonetheless. It was somewhat unprofessionally done, but, well, the next week he had the finished product, and I was amazed. There in front of me was a photo, me splayed out, chest opened, organs there for the world to see. I congratulated James on his piece and asked to see the others. He, too, gave them out one by one. These pieces looked more professional, like he had had more time with images. Glowing red hearts and brilliant white lungs against the grayscale backing of the human flesh. The T had been folded back. It amazed me how beautiful the pictures were comparative to how closely resembled autopsy pictures. It was that night when I had my first nightmare. I went to be excited for the next day. Michael James' opening would evidently bring a crowd. I had called most of my contacts and friends to come down to the gallery. None of them would have seen anything quite like this before. Then I shut my eyes, and the dream began. It was a day like any other. I got up, showered, had breakfast, and grabbed a coffee at Gino's before heading to THE gallery. I burnt my tongue on the coffee. I remember that. When I got to the gallery, I could hear a noise coming from the back room. It sounded like panting, heavy panting. I walked past the empty desk and walked to the back. I had never given much thought to being robbed, but now the process was running through my head very clearly. Instead, I found Michael James crouched over a figure of a W. Oman, heaving very heavily. He turned around to reveal blood dripping down his face and into his beard. The woman was dead. He flung out his hand, and something flew at me. It was then I woke up. That day I was a little shaken. I followed my normal pattern: shower, breakfast, coffee, and Gino's. It was when I burnt my tongue on the coffee that I slowed my pace and looked around. It was just like any other day, people walking by and acting like nothing was wrong, but deep in my gut I could feel something wasn't right. I shook my head and passed it off as déjà vu. When I got into the gallery, I heard the heaving and panting coming from the back. I started to panic and grab a crowbar that was used to open crates upon arrival. I stepped cautiously towards the back of the Saint and found Michael James trying to move a rather large box into the back door. When I saw him, I automatically lowered my crowbar, feeling foolish. He looked up at me, asking for a hand together. We moved the crate into the back room as he explained that he had a stroke of inspiration last night, had spent the entire night working on a new piece that he would like to put in to replace the picture he had done of me. Well, when he opened up the box, I was unable to speak. The photo was that of myself and a woman, lying on cement in the shape of a yin-yang symbol, guts pooling together. In the center, there was a cut in my throat. It looked as if I had been stabbed there, the same mark appeared on her neck. The strangest thing is that between this and the original and only image he had taken of me, I had a different facial expression and was in a different pose. Photoshop was either a skill that Michael James knew very well or, I don't know. There was no other logical explanation. That night the opening took place and Michael James chatted with each and every person there individually, taking photos and laughing from behind his big matted beard. He seemed so charming and happy, but still I couldn't get the image of him covered in blood out of my head. I mingled to keep my mind of things. I met every one of his models, and they all said that they had lovely experiences with James. Not one of them had a word to say about him, but for me, I could not shake the feeling. That night I slept again, and again I had a dream of coming into the gallery and of Michael James covered in blood over a dead body in the back. Then each night after that the same thing. I would always come in and find him with a new piece of work, a sculpture or a 3D rendering. I featured in them many times, as did a lot of my friends and contacts that had shown up on that first night. He became famous so quickly, his art was selling quicker than we had time to put them up. Some days I would have consecutive dreams all the same, and then Michael James would come in the next day with 5 more pictures for me to hang up. I couldn't cope anymore. Coincident or not, the nightmares just repeated, and after 2 months of it I snapped. I made sure that it was a dream. I made sure that I could see him before I did anything. Then I took out my gun and shot him in the head. He ended up lying dead on the floor in front of his most recent art piece. Then a strange thing happened. The dream scope changed. The scene began slowly to move backwards and rewind until eventually I was getting out of bed again, this time with the gun in hand. I checked the bullets. One had been fired. I left the gun at home and walked back to the gallery. I found Michael James once again stooped over a dead body, with blood drenching his body and a camera in hand. He attacked me savagely. When I woke up, the gun was next to me. I picked it up. There, Washington S. Still a bullet missing. Something was wrong. I didn't know what to do. Things became more panicked in the nightmares from then on. Michael and I played cat and mouse, him trying to finish his work whilst I tried to find new ways to kill him. During the daytime hours, though, things began to blur. I remember once being sure I was awake and helping Michael carry a sculpture in, and then just pushing it on top of him, watching him bleed out. Before I rewound to the moment of waking, soon I didn't care about his life anymore. I would chain him up, and he would drink my blood. Saint, I was pinned to the floor under a fallen bookcase. Even now I have no clue how much of it was real and how much of it was the nightmares. But the moment I know now was real was the day I shot him last. It was a day or nightmare like any other. I came into the gallery and decided to surprise Michael by shooting him before he could do anything. But when he waved hello, I felt that perhaps his was an off time for it. So we sat down and had coffee whilst he talked about his new pieces and how much money he was bringing in. I fondled the trigger in my pocket and agreed that I was owing the percentage return I was getting as well. Then I pulled the trigger and he died. There was no rewind, no changing, no shift or wake up. He just died. There was a certain satisfaction I got from it, I'll admit, so many times with nothing to show. Hell, there was some relief in all that. I might actually be free of him now, of his creepy art and his fucked nightmare ways. So I too a picture of him with his camera. I laid him out on the cement and took a picture just to capture my moment of triumph. So yes, I guess that's why I've done it. I guess that's why I picked up where he left off. See, every time I killed someone, I just went back from then on. But I had the camera and all the pictures. My work is not as good as Michael James, but, well, he was a true monster. I am just his apprentice. Story 2. What haunts the fields? In the midst of the fields, they say, are where the bodies were found. They were nailed to a stick of wood and used as scarecrows, but not before their bones and organs were removed and replaced with straw. Is the story true? Jonas asked. Of course not, my boy, Hicks replied, laughing his way into the kitchen. Hicks was a 60-year-old man who had lived across from the fields his whole entire life. Jonas was a young 17-year-old male who was hitchhiking along the road that sits just outside Hicks' home. Hicks felt bad for the boy, so he allowed him to stay in the spare bedroom of his home in exchange for work around the farm. He'd only been there for 4 days, and everything was well. But there was something about the fields that gave Jonas the creeps. It was the way the crops swayed inconsistently with the wind. It was the smell that would linger around the fields and make its way toward the hoe. But most of all, it was the stories that Hicks would tell him about the fields. Every night before he'd go to sleep, Jonas would take a peek at the fields. He'd never see anything, other than crows. But one night he saw something else. It fled across the fields and disappeared into the distance. He didn't get a desirable sighting of the thing, and that's what scared him the most. The only thing he saw was a dark shadow. He didn't look away. Even after the thing had already disappeared, he kept his eyes gazed out at the fields. He thought about what Hicks' age had told him. Dying is not exactly what people are afraid of. It's the fear of the unknown. Nobody knows what comes after death, so they fear dying in every way possible. In this situation, Jonas was fearing the unknown. If he had gotten a more desirable glimpse of the thing, he'd know what it was. It's the fact that something is out there, and he had no idea what it was. That's what scared him the most. The next morning, Hicks and Jonas both were distressed to find some of the crops in the fields to be destroyed. Thinking about what he saw the night before, Jonas was convinced he knew what had destroyed the crops. He informed Hicks about what he saw. It's the damn crows, Hicks said, ignoring what Jonas had told him. It's always the damn crows. The hours went by slowly but surely. Jonas was just finishing up work in the barn and heading toward the house when he'd heard something shuffling through the fields. He was curious, but yet afraid of the unknown. He walked cautiously into the dark fields, the moon being his only source of light. He had a pitchfork in his hands, and He held that pitchfork in a defensive position as he shuffled through the fields. He heard nothing. He knew it was out there, even when he was standing completely still. He heard something moving through the fields. He heard it snickering. He heard it breathing. There was something out there, but he couldn't see it, and that's what scared him the most. Fear of the unknown. As Jonas stood in the center of the fields, he realized he was lost. He smelled something deadly. He shuffled through the fields a bit more, and that's when he found it. Not the thing, not what haunts the fields, but he found a man nailed to a piece of wood as the straw hung out of his hut. His skin was desiccated, and the bottom portions of his legs were removed just above his knees. He thought he heard him breathing, but no, the man's been dead for over a month. He heard something else. He looked to his right, and that's when he saw it. Not waiting for a second, he took off running. He ran through the fields, not even worrying about the fact that he was lost. All he could think about was what he saw. Despite the fact that he'd seen it, he still did not know what it was. Fear of the unknown. He kept running, shuffling through the fields as horrified as he could be. He ran into Hicks, who'd gone out to look for him. He followed him back to the house, explaining to Hicks everything that he saw. "He's out there," he yelled. "I've see. And him, you calm the hell down, boy." Hicks yelled. Jonas had become silent, but still shaking from fear. What haunts the fields is not a he, and it's not a who. It's a what. It's an it. As a thing, it killed a man, Jonas said. "It's out there. We have to call the police. There ain't nothing no police can do," Hicks said. "We'll be safe just as long as we stay from the fields at night. What does it want?" "It's the damn crows," Hicks replied. "It's always the damn crows." Jonas went to bed that night, unable to sleep with the haunting images of what he saw earlier. At night on his mind, he spent most of that night glancing out the window, fearing that what haunts the fields is still out there. It wasn't until he began dozing off that he saw it again. Its beaming red eyes could be seen from miles away, but it was much closer than that. It was standing near Hicks' tractor, staring into the fearful eyes of Jonas before it fled into the fields and disappeared the next day. Jonas still could not get the images of that night off his mind. From the dead man to the beaming red eyes of the thing, he was being haunted by the images. When the night rolled along, Jonas made sure to get inside the house before sundown. He was all alone at night. Hicks had left hours before for a supply run. Just a few hours after sundown, a scream had echoed from the fields. It was a woman. Jonas thought about it, and he thought about it hard. He decided that it wasn't right for him to just stand there and listen as the woman screamed for her life. He grabbed a shotgun belonging to Hicks, not even sure how to use it. He ran out of the house and into the fields, screaming out for the woman. She was no longer screaming, hadn't screamed in minutes. He got to the center of the fields, and that's when he saw her. She was nailed to a stick, straw hanging out of her gut. The bottom portions of her legs were removed and were also filled with straw. He thought that she was breathing, but no, she was dead, and again it was the thing with its beaming red eyes staring back at him. Jonas took off running, able to find the house minutes later. He ran inside and locked every door and every window. It was coming after him, and he knew it. Eventually, everything had become silent. The only thing he could hear was the beating of his own heart. There was a knock at the door, and his heart was getting louder. Another knock, and his heart was getting louder. Again, another knock, and his heart was getting louder. He knew that it could have been Hicks, but he also knew it could have been the thing. His chest was getting tighter as he took a deep breath. The fear was growing more intense. He didn't know who it was outside the door. Fear of the unknown. He walked slowly to the door, dragging his feet as he got closer and closer. He looked through the peephole, but all he could see was a bright red. It blinded him for a few seconds, but he knew what it was because he stared into that red a few times before he ran from the door. Unsure of what to do, he hid inside his bedroom closet. Everything was quiet for a minute. The only thing he could hear was his own breathing. When the front door creaked open, the fear got more intense, and his chest even tighter. He tried with everything he had not to make even the smallest sound. The sound of footsteps wandered through the home and made its way toward Jonas. They were getting closer, and the closer they got, the louder his heartbeat would sound. His bedroom door creaked open. Whatever or whoever it was in the room. Its breathing, he could hear its breathing as it was louder than it had ever been before. The closet door creaked open, and Jonas was certain he was the next to be nailed to a stick and displayed as a scarecrow. However, it was Hicks who stood in front of him. "What are you doing, boy?" he yelled, taking the gun from Jonas. "It was here," Jonas said. "It was outside the door." Hicks shook his head as he was snickering, a sound so familiar to Jonas. "You got it all wrong, my boy," he said. "You see, I left out a very important part about what haunts the fields." He got closer as Jonas backed up against the wall. "It doesn't just kill anybody. It picks up hitchhikers, and it takes them to his home where it tells them stories about the fields." His eyes become a bright, beaming red. "Do you know what it does to them next?" "No," Jonas cried. "It guts them. It stuffs them with straw, and then it nails them to a stick out in the fields," he said. "Do you know why it does that?" "No," he cried again. "It's the damn crows, he said. "It's always the damn crows." Story 3. The Yellow Walls. June 30th, the void that my parents have left behind ever since their death has slowly begun to consume the whole of me. I had seen it happen with my own eyes. My parents inside a CAR being crushed under an oil tanker, followed by a colossal explosion. Nothing much had remained in that crash. That was exactly 5 months and 12 days ago, and soon the damp walls of my house haunted me. Every unkempt corner, every discarded object, every bit of the house reminded me of happy times. I imagined I could hear my mom humming in the kitchen or my dad laughing in the living room. My recent bereavement was getting on to my nerves. I have no relations to maintain, no promises to keep. I just had my 12 hours job with all the extra time for which I got paid. It was not the money that mattered anymore. I have to keep myself engaged somehow. I think I knew it all along, that I would have to move out one day, if not to escape the cesspool of memories, then start anew. July 2nd. Sold my house to a businessman who was more than just willing to pay me a handsome amount, just enough to buy myself this house on the eastern fringes of the city. The nearest house is a mile away. I thought buying a house in the countryside would make me drive an extra hour into the city. So I chose this house, with a bright yellow plaster. The color seemed cheery, and I hope it will help me do away with my former house and all the memories it harbored. The house itself seems pleasant, and the surroundings are peaceful. I wanted to find peace. I think I will find peace here. July 4th. I love this house. It's warm and comfortable. The rooms are large and gets plenty of sun and air from the windows. I met my nearest neighbor today. He seemed a burly, middle-aged, good-humored chap, and his small, kindly wife makes really great cookies. However, they often seem to be looking a bit queerly at me when they thought I wasn't looking. But they probably don't have a lot of city people out here, so maybe they are curious about me. July 7th, something about this house has started to make me uncomfortable. I feel like I am being watched. I woke up from sleep last night, expecting to find an intruder in my house. I don't know why I felt that way. The sensation of being watched was very strong. The air had grown particularly dense and chilly. It took an effort to draw my breath. I think I'm just being paranoid, though. It's new for me after all. I'm bound to feel uneasy, having lived in the CI for so long. The nights get too quiet for my liking. Oh well. July 8th, I woke up again tonight. It felt uncomfortable. The air was heavy. It was different, almost wrong. I switched on my light. Everything looked normal in the light, though the feeling dissipated. July 9th, I found a discoloration in the yellow ceiling today, directly above my bed. The plaster had somewhat faded away in one place. It looked wet. Maybe there was something wrong with the plumbing. Have to ask a plumber to come down and take a look. July 11th, I got a plumber to take a look a few days back, but nothing wrong with it. Even the discoloration hadn't been there. But that night I found that the discoloration was back. The shape looked somewhat familiar, like a man, perhaps, and the next morning it was just gone again. This is happening for a few days now. Maybe the pipe contracts during night or something and water leaks out. It gets cold in the night anyway, hurts to breathe with the air all heavy. I need to check this out. July 13th, I have a growing feeling that the sensation of being watched increases when the discoloration is there. It is creeping me out. I called the plumber, who came again, and he said there was nothing wrong. I wish it would go away. It looks like a man more than ever, and it appears at different places every day. I have noticed. Is it alive? Maybe it's a snake that has burrowed in the pipes or something. I swear I'm going to be up all night today. I'll catch it if it moves. July 14th, I couldn't stay up all night. Asleep. The man's shape is now on the left wall. I'll try my luck tonight. July 15th, couldn't stay up last night either. This is frustrating. The damn shape is back and now on the ceiling. I can't stay up at an height like this every day. I'll mess up at work. July 17th, the shape is scaring me. I cannot catch it move. Yet there it is, in a different place every day. I have been trying to stay up all night watching the shape intently. It looks just like a normal plumbing problem, but it isn't. ITISNT. I'm sure it is alive. I will catch it. Last night I felt so damn scared I drew the bedsheet like a thin blanket and hid myself under it. I covered every inch of myself, from the tips of my tightly curled toes to the bend of my head, and I held the end of the bedsheet tightly, clenched in my fist. Who was I hiding from? Death, perhaps. Death in the shape of a man. But death is peaceful. Death isn't repulsively yellow. death is momentary. I'm rambling now, ha. Maybe W. Had I experienced was a sleep terror or something. I'll look it up. I have to sleep. God, I feel so sleepy. July 20th, every damn night I would be startled out of sleep to E'en the discoloration at different places and different positions. In my room, I hate it. I cannot sleep any more. It seemed the discoloration the man would choose from the vast yellow any spot, to persecute me, torture me with uneasy sensations and terror, and I felt disturbingly obsessed with the color. What exactly was the man in the wall telling me? What did I owe him, and what did he owe me? I haven't confided in anyone my experiences regarding the nightly errands of the man in the plaster. My colleagues think I'm suffering from chronic insomnia. One guy actually suggested me a week's leave from the office. What a joke. That was the least I would ever want. The more I stay away, the less I thought of it. It's horrible as it is to come home to this entity which I'm sure was malevolent. I'm going to call a priest. Damn it, July 23rd today, when I ran away from my house frantically and reached my office, palpitating. My boss called me to his room. He suggested that I was in need of some rest. I grew desperate at the word. I pleaded with him, but his tone grew sharper, and he told me how some more deserving and fruitful and should get the money I draw from the office every month without significantly contributing to the company. In my panic and frustration, I'm afraid I screamed at him. He looked at me like I'm CR. Has he? 2 security guards forced me out of the office, and another one kicked out my suitcase along with me. I thought of never returning to the house. But where could I go? Am I crazy? I'm not. I know I am not. July 24th, I saw them. I swear I saw my parents. It was them, with mutilated bodies, dislocated shoulders, detached legs, and broken necks on cracked skulls and blood-smeared faces. I haven't seen anything more horrifying. I blinked and they were gone, but I can feel them. They are in the walls. They are everywhere. This can't be a drink-induced hallucination. I know what I saw. I am not crazy. They want me to join them in the walls. They were my parents, and they were here. I'm not crazy. I raised my gaze up to the ceiling, only to find the man gone. The discoloration had dissolved away, like it was never there. I swear this time I'll catch it if it appears again. I know it's watching me. I have to prove that I'm not crazy. July 25th. IT moved, it moved. IT moved, IT moved. I saw IT move. July 26th. Can't write. Fingernail broke. I scratched wall. Haha, drink, and wall scratch going home. There weren't any more entries in the diary that the police had found. The inspector stopped reading. The last page was covered with splotches of blood. This was a singular piece of literature, for sure. He looked around at the pale yellow Washington LLs. An entire section of a wall was scratched and the plaster was missing. Blood was smeared all over it. He assumed it was from the broken fingernails. The poor man must have gone crazy, thought the inspector. The man's body had been found, laying half in and half out of the wall. His face was blue, and he looked strangled. There weren't subcutaneous abrasions or anything like that. If it was possible, it looked as if the man had died from holding his breath for too long. Crazy stuff, he thought. As he stood up to go, he noticed a wet discoloration in the ceiling. But that was only the plumbing. He left. Story 4. my old stomping grounds. When I was young, we were left unattended. My friends and I rode our bikes deep into the fields and returned at our leisure. He rarely played in the same location and often ditched it after a few days. With each new adventure, we drifted further from civilization, and one day we struck gold, figuratively speaking, of course. We came across a massive field which seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. It appeared to be abandoned farmland, and the grasses and weeds had grown past our waists. The entire area was completely silent, as if we had broken the sound barrier, and to some degree our voices seemed several octaves higher than normal. Whenever we went there, we lifted our bikes over a rotted wooden fence, and then we pedaled through the field. It quickly became one of our favorite locations. Our last excursion stuck with me the most. It was the day we discovered the farmhouse. I have no idea how we never noticed it before. It was just there, but somehow we overlooked it. We rode over to the house to observe it up close, and it appeared more beautiful from a distance. The age was clear in the peeling paint, the shoddy shutters, and the broken windows. The farmhouse was 2 stories tall, possibly 3, and had a large veranda smudged with grime. The porch extended around the house, and we noticed a rickety porch swing, creaking back and forth on a rusted chain. There was no wind. While I was left pondering this, my friends abandoned their bikes by the wayside and dashed across the dirt road. I abandoned my bike as well and followed them hesitantly. I turned to my left and right. Just like the field, the dirt road extended into oblivion. Guys, what if somebody lives here? I asked. My main concern was disturbing the homeowner and getting kicked off the property. Oh, come on. There's nobody here. George hauled back. George was the most adventurous of the 3 of us. His confidence usually got us all in trouble. I decided to trust him and crossed to the other side of the dirt road. Both of my friends were already standing on the porch. Can you see inside? Ryan, my other friend, shook his head. There's a thick curtain in the way. It smells really musty over here. I had to agree with him. It smelled old and decrepit. The porch, above all else, seemed to be in the worst state of decay, but somehow it held our weight. Curiously, we wandered all the way around the house. If anyone lived there, they would have heard us because the wood squeaked terribly. Each step made me cringe. But when nobody confronted us, I eventually relaxed. None of us voiced it, but we all wanted to break into the house. It seemed too soon for that. We'd have to wait a week or so. We had to be absolutely sure that the farmhouse was vacant. The backyard was nothing spectacular. It was overgrown like the rest of the land. There was a crumpled shed several yards away, along with a rusted pickup. We put off exploring them and continued around the house until we reached the front once more. We scurried off to collect our bikes, but we became sidetracked when George discovered an opening in the lattice which led underneath the porch. Naturally, we were beyond excited. I inched myself halfway through the opening and confirmed that we could easily fit. That's when I noticed the look in George's eyes. He was about to make a bet. I bet that I can crawl through there faster than you, he insisted with crossed arms. I lost our previous bet, so I needed to redeem myself. Betting was our thing, and it often involved races, whether on our bikes or on foot. Because of this, Ryan always kept a stopwatch handy. Fine. I didn't bother creating ultimatums. Nothing scared us. I'll go first, I offered. I wanted the lay of the land, so George couldn't rig anything. I crouched down beside the opening and waited for Ryan to retrieve the stopwatch from his bike. The dirt was clammy beneath my hands, and I noticed lichens growing along the foundation of the house. I tried not to think of spiders or snakes. We had done worse things than this. Wait a second. I want my eyes to adjust. I told my friends I didn't want to risk bumping my head against anything. Are you ready? Ryan muttered, raising the stopwatch. Yeah, okay. Maybe I was a bit nervous. Go, I forced myself through the opening and felt the lattice clawing at my clothes. I tugged my hips inside and took a hard right, crawling straight for the first turn. Once I reached it, the tunnel narrowed, and I was forced to army crawl. I felt the grime smearing into my arms and soaking into my clothes. I pressed onward and dug my shoes into the ground, practically dragging myself along. As soon as reached the second turn, I felt a draft, but I tried my best to ignore the chilly air. Even so, the air seemingly grew colder, especially from my left, until it felt like ice was pressing against my ribs. The longer stretch before me must have been the back porch, and I felt disheartened when the tunnel remained narrow. If anything, it seemed narrower than before. As soon as I passed the halfway mark, I heard frenzied scuffling. The tunnel was too narrow for me to turn around, but I knew it was one of my friends, probably George. I felt him grab my ankle, jerking me sharply backward. I caught myself on the lattice and kicked backward angrily, hitting my friend square in the face. You cheater, I screamed. I army crawled faster than ever before. My friend was persistent, though, and I heard him right behind me. I blocked everything out and dug my arms mercilessly into the ground, clawing myself through the tunnel until I burst out of the opening. I was breathing heavily and covered head to foot with nasty red clay. What the hell is the matter with you? I screamed at Ryan. Ryan was standing there timidly, and of course, George was nowhere to be seen. They were both cheaters. Ryan was wavering, and he extended the stopwatch to me. You were under there for 27 minutes. What? No, I wasn't. I snatched the stopwatch from Ryan and stared down at 27 minutes, 32 seconds. You guys are messed up. Ryan clearly never reset the watch. I stopped shouting as soon as Ryan began crying. That's not funny, Sam. We were worried. We were calling for you, and you weren't responding. George went in there about 10 minutes ago to search for you. I didn't know what to think of this. I stomped over to the opening and began calling for George, but received no response. You guys never called for me, I replied stubbornly, glaring at Ryan, who was still sobbing. Ryan allowed the stopwatch to keep running. When another 15 minutes passed, we were sick of waiting for George. We'll just go back in and find him. You can go to the right. It's more open that way. I'll go to the left. We'll meet in the middle. Ryan seemed reluctant of the plan. I convinced him to squeeze inside after me, and we split up. This was all George's fault. He probably threatened Ryan to go along with it. I was going to kick George's ass when we got out of here. When I crawled beneath the back porch, I heard scuffling ahead of me. George, I called. No, it's me. I narrowed my eyes in confusion when I met Ryan in the mid. DLE, did you find George? No. Did you? My heart skipped a few beats. No. By this point, we were both unnerved, and I had to help Ryan turn around. I couldn't go backward through the tunnel since it was so narrow. It took us several minutes, but we reached the opening. Without a hitch, we lingered around the front porch and wondered if we had missed George somehow. That was the irrational side of me thinking. Those tunnels barely fit one person, let alone two. It would have been impossible for George to pass us going in the opposite direction. We waited until nightfall for George to reveal himself, but he never did. We called out to him and warned him that we were leaving. It was growing so dark. We didn't want to linger any longer. We crossed to our bikes, covered in that foul red CL. And warned him one final time. Reluctantly, we pedaled away from the farmhouse and followed the dirt road home. Our parents were forced to believe us when George didn't return that night. The cops were called, and the next morning we led them to the field and the lonely farmhouse. We described what happened in detail and watched them knock on the front door, waiting tirelessly for someone to answer. When nobody did, they went to investigate the opening in the lattice the cops were too big to fit. While they were searching the perimeter, I went to retrieve G's bike from where we left it, but it was gone. George was never found, and the case was closed. 11 years later, there was a development in the long-forgotten case. Our city went through a period of rapid urbanization, and our county began buying up the adjacent farmland. The old farmhouse was demolished, but there was sickening discovery at its core. The entire foundation was layered in, dried blood and scattered with small bones. The bones belonged to children and were covered in harsh bite marks. Story 5. The Price is Right. The Careys had spent months searching for an apartment in the city. After sleeping on friends' floors from July through the beginning of September, they were ready to have a home of their own. Their friends had been more than welcoming, but the urge was growing tiresome. "Hon," said Owen from the couch one night as he scrolled through the online listings once more. "Hon, there's one in Lakivi. Oh, wait, never mind." The white glow of the screen lit up his glasses as he sat in the near darkness of another friend's apartment. "On, let's go to bed," said Mal from the doorway. She looked endearingly at her husband and sighed with a sympathetic smile. "Come on, you've been looking for hours." She crossed the wooden floor to sit on the couch by him. The old boards creaked beneath her bare feet. Mal put her chin on Owen's shoulder, but his eyes remained on the screen. "Just one more," he muttered, half to her and half to himself. "Mal, what do you think of this one in wicker? It looks really good on here." But his voice trailed off as he scanned the glowing page. His eyes were sore, but the price that can't be right. His thick brows elevated. "That looks nice. Oh, come, let's go to bed." She reached across his lap and slowly pulled the top of the screen closed. "All right," said Owen. "That last one looked really good. Let's check it out tomorrow. Oh, I have that thing with Beth Tomer. Rah, but you go look at it for us." Then, almost to herself, she added, "Hope I don't have that dream again tonight." They rose to walk to the guest room. Owen rubbed his tight neck. He didn't realize he had been hunched over so long. Owen and Mal had moved to Chicago. For months after they were married, both were from Arizona, he from Flagstaff and she from Phoenix. Their wedding was beautiful and lush. They were beautiful. They had moved to Chicago so as Webb design business could finally get off the ground and she could connect with the fitness community in Chicago. Mallory was a marathoner. She was the fastest female at Phoenix U, but nowadays it was a hobby for a brief time before meeting Owen. She had tried to launch her own line of snacks for runners that replaced electrolytes and boosted energy. Why called Mallory's Calories when the idea failed? She went by Mal. The next day on, and his friend David drove to Wicker Park to look at the house. It was situated just several blocks north of 6 Points, Wicker's central hub, and a beautiful lane lined with green trees and brick sidewalks. Every house appeared to have been designed by a different architect, providing an eclectic appearance of a giant mosaic. The house was on the center of the block, edged on one side by a very postmodern glass house and a tall brown brick home on the other. The house itself was nice enough. It Boaz had no spectacular features compared to the rest on the block, but it was beautiful in its own humble respect. Whitewashed wood paneling fronted it, with green trim and a red brick base. Wow, said Owen, looking over the building the way a child stands before a bakery window with his finger on his lip. I seriously can't figure out why the price is so low. Dave had accompanied Owen on a number of house hunts since he had arrived in the city. Let's look at the inside, he sighed. Maybe that'll explain it. They ascended the steps and knocked on the GR door. Getting a closer view of the house only made it more appealing to Owen. A relatively well-kept garden sat just below the front windows on either side of the front porch, where a smattering of colorful flowers were in full late summer bloom. The door opened and a woman in her northern 60s appeared behind it. She smiled gently as her bright green eyes smiled up at the men. You must be Owen, she sighed, extending a small shriveled hand. Her skin was soft and cool, and when she smiled, her lips dug deep into her cheeks. She told them her name was Ava. Please, come in, she said, stepping by CK from the door and opening it wider. Oh, thank you, said Owen. Can I get you anything? She tossed over her shoulder as she walked back toward the kitchen. UHM? No, ma'am. We're Fine, he called back as they entered, scanning the interior of the house. It was small enough to be cozy and large enough to host get-togethers. Dave and Owen both took turns throwing out courteous questions to show their interest. But Owen had made up his mind. The worn white walls and hardwood flooring added character, and the location was ideal. It's all so great, said Owen after Ava had shown them throughout the entire building. But if I may ask, is there a reason the price is so low? I mean, Ava looked at the ground, and for a moment her worn demeanor dropped. Half a sec on later, she looked back up and smiled wearily. Her eyes suddenly seemed like they were a foot inside her head as she spoke through the forced grin. No reason, she nearly whispered, pushing her well-worn dimples back into her cheeks, and after a moment, I'm just ready to move on, get somewhere quieter, out of the city. She turned and walked back to the kitchen. Please, look around all you want, gentlemen, she called back through the door. The next day, Owen parked the car in the nearest spot he could find 2 blocks away, and he and Mal walked to the house. He hopped alongside her, still reeling with disbelief that he had finally found their home. They were 3 houses away when Mal's pace slowed. When Owen looked at her, her eyes were wide and her feet were dragging. "Mal," he said, "everything all right?" She paused for a moment. "Oh, this may sound crazy, but you have to believe me." He nodded, encouraging her to go on. Thoroughly confused, yo. "You know that dream I've been telling you about? The one I have every couple nights, yeah." He wished he had listened better when she had described it. "I think this is the street from my dray. A.M., I know it sounds crazy. Oh, but I've seen this street before, exactly like this, as it is today. Sometimes it's night, but also like this." Owen was nodding sympathetically. "And I always walk up to that house over there." Owen froze. She was pointing to the house, their house. "What happens then?" he asked. "Well, I knock on the door and then wait. Right when the door begins to open, I wake up." Owen felt his neck tense again. He tried to brush off the whole thing, hoping it was mere coincidence. They knocked, and Ava answered with a big, wrinkled smile. "You must be Mal," she cried, reaching up to embrace her. Ava and Owen walked Mal through the whole house, Owen showing her every unique feature and special corner of the building. By the end of the tour, Mal had nearly forgotten her dream and had been swept away by the whimsical interior of the property. On the drive home, Mal asked why the price was so low. "That's exactly what I asked her," replied Owen. "I guess it's just her time to move on, and she's in kind of a rush to get out of the city." He chuckled. "I guess at that age, you need to make decisions a bit quicker." His wife elbowed him while he drove. The next weekend they moved in. By the first night, boxes littered every room, and their bed was a queen-sized mattress lying on the ground. They were exhausted. Mal went to the bedroom while Owen got some work done on the computer. He had already made a few connections in the city, and business was quickly picking up. He was good at what he did. About an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Owen looked at the clock in the corner of the screen and shook his head. It was almost 11. Muttering under his breath, he pushed himself up onto his feet and walked to the door. Fidgeted with the locks. When he got it open, he looked out on the porch, and no one was there. He leaned out the doorway and looked up and down the street. He shook his head and closed the door. "Kids," he muttered to himself, and then, "Old lady couldn't take a joke." The next morning, Owen told Mal about the pranking. "It's no big deal," she said, smiling and smacking his arm. "They're just welcoming the new people. We're like the new kids. We'll meet them soon, and it won't happen again. Lighten up." She laughed. Mal finished her breakfast and left for an interview with the gym only a few blocks from the house. The next few days blurred together as the two of them unpacked their belongings and filled in the barren places in the house. Mal got the job, and Owen began catching cabs down to the Loop several days a week for meetings with new clients. 2 weeks later, they were asleep when there was another knock on the door. Neither one stirred for a moment until the knock came again, louder. "I'll get it," slurred Mal as she threw her long legs off the bed and stood up. After dressing, she shuffled to the door and looked outside. No one was there. Mal froze as she fully woke up and remembered she had been having the dream again. Story 6. A moment's clarity. When Anita found him, her immediate reaction was to put him in the floor next to the stairwell so he could be decorative. Not everyone would have one, and the way his arms stuck out just so would make him a suitable hat rack. She realized, almost too late, that this might have been in bad taste. But what, she thought, was a woman, and supposed to do when her husband went and turned into a glass statue overnight? She had heard of this happening, of course. It just seemed to happen to other people. One day they were perfectly normal, and then the next, someone found them frozen clear. She had heard of it, but had never seriously considered it happening to her. The people this happened to were far too glamorous, celebrities and tea he liked, certainly not to him. She was a widow now. That made her feel old at 37 years, and she was sure she didn't like it. After a week, she quietly filed a mortician's report and sat down to a cup of hot tea. She hadn't broken it to his family yet, though his sister had been calling. She told her he was away on business. There was no reason to tell them yet. The Quentins could wait another day to hear their little boy wasn't okay. At that very moment it occurred to her that using her husband's remains as a hat rack might be poorly received by the general public, and so Anita began the difficult task of finding a place for him. At first she kept him to the study in front of the fireplace. He kept her company with her tea, but soon she began to find that sitting with the countenance of her dead husband reminded her of her widowhood, so she moved him to the garden and used him to scare the crows away from her tomatoes. He did little to dissuade the crows, however, and soon became their favorite perch. Finally, she hauled him to the attic. She kept the rest of her glass figurines there, and didn't see why he should be treated any differently. Somehow, it all seemed normal at the time. Everywhere you looked, someone was at it. The glass bodies seemed to multiply. When she called her husband's mother and told her tearfully that he had passed away, why, she burst into hysterics and told her that so had one of the grandchildren. Anita was uncomfortable, and then she hung up. When the man who cut her lawn succumbed as well, she began to worry. Now, tea was affecting her everyday life, which was something her husband and niece had not generally been part of. Her husband worked constantly and usually slept when he graced her with his presence. Her niece, whose name she couldn't even remember, lived in Florida. She put entirely too much sugar in her tea and shivered as she drank it. She did miss her husband sometimes, and now she would have to trim her own lawn. Her first hint that something might have been a bit off was when she found her neighbor frozen solid while pulling the weeds in his yard. The next day, while shopping for groceries, the bag boy with a crackle transformed, still clutching her biscotti. She tenderly wrenched it from his grip, glanced around half-heartedly, and didn't pay. Then the news reports began to get very tiresome. First it was strange, isolated events, then it was an epidemic, then a pandemic, and then it was Susan Shepherd reporting to You Live from New York City. And crackle, ting, suddenly she wasn't reporting. Suddenly she wasn't even alive. There was panic after that, and lootings and riots, or so Anita saw on the news. She kept to herself. These days her sister hadn't called in weeks. She half expected her to be found, phone in hand, sitting at her kitchen table, never to move again. A week later, the police confirmed her suspicions. Her sister was found not at the phone but in bed. 3 relatives now dead, Anita found in horror that she had run out of tea bags. It had been months since Anita found her husband, and her lawn was long. The 4 houses around hers couldn't claim a single opaque resident. She'd taken to not leaving the study for days on end, sitting by the fire with her tea, while her husband sat in the attic, staring at a wall. He wasn't needed in the yard anymore, not since the neighbor had frozen there. Anita came to miss him in the study, but he tended to alienate visitors, of which she found she was having less and less these days. At first, she'd gotten dozens of calls for funerals of her husband's mother, friends, old boyfriends, but soon even the funerals died off. There were too many to throw. The television only worked sporadically, and when it did, it showed news. It told her to lock her doors and windows. It told her there were people who thought this would pass. People who were trying to take things from those who had turned so they would be wealthy when they and the rest of humanity came out the other end. It used the word anarchy a lot. The futility of this did not escape Anita, but when the looters came, as the news assured her they would, she thought the best way to be rid of them, and quickly, would be to set out a Plato lemonade for them, and to point them in the direction of the attic, where she kept an odd assortment of expensive-looking things that had, at one point, been her grandmother's, that, she thought, would keep them happy while she kept to the study with her husband, for she hadn't had use for the china in years, anyway. It annoyed her, though, when they woke her up in the middle of the night. Roland had robbed a lot of houses before and after it became commonplace, but thought that few had ever looked as empty as this one. He received a terrible shock when Anita spoke. "Hello," she said, wiping sleep from her eyes with one hand and holding a candle in the other. "Headaches that way." Roland had been greeted many ways upon entering a house he planned to rob. This was not one he was used to. "I'm going to have some tea," she said, and began walking slowly away. Roland's mind reeled for a moment, and then he set off for the attic. In the kitchen, Anita sleepily sipped the Earl Grey when Roland trudged down the stairs with a sack over his shoulder and came upon her. He stopped mid-step and looked at her carefully. "All those people up there, the glass ones?" Pause. "Sip, yeah, the glass ones. What about them?" Sip. "Why did you think of it as a sort of a tomb?" Roland decided he'd stay. Anita mistrusted him at first, but and found it was a great relief just having him around. She was running low on food, and it really was lovely to have someone to break into a grocery store with. As much as she knew how low the chances were of her finding anything dangerous, the lonely streets seemed much less so. With a companion, he tended the garden, collected rainwater for drinking and bathing, and even sometimes sat with her by the fireplace, sharing a seemingly endless stockpile of tea with her. "We're going to run out of food, you know," Roland mentioned. "Even just between the two of us, there is only so low that store will hold out." Anita shrugged and stared into her tea. Even she had to admit the great mound of canned goods they had made in the grocery was beginning to run low. Her eyes settled on the fire, and it was a moment before she answered. "So what do you suppose we should do?" Roland shrugged. "I don't know. Leave." Anita didn't answer. After 2 weeks, they had eaten nearly all the food they had brought back from their last trip to the store, and agreed, Anita a little grudgingly, that they would keep walking after this next trip to the grocery and see where it led them. There was not hing for them here, Roland reasoned, and besides, maybe they'd find other people. Their lives became a long journey from food source to convenience store to market to people's basements, sleeping when they could and traveling as they pleased. They took what they needed, carried what they could, and moved on. Roland led them, taking to this life with complete ease. As they walked, he shouted things back at her like, "Lovely, isn't it?" And she never answered. He found her silence unnerving. Eventually, after weeks of traveling from convenience store to grocery to mini mall, they came upon a set of high cliffs with a sheer drop to the sea. Anita had liberated a bottle of wine from the last supermarket they slept in, and the two of them sat with it and watched the sun rise. "I've been thinking, Anita," Roland said gently, "that the world ended." "No," was her answer. It was the first time she had spoken in months. "Yes, it did," he said with not a little sadness in his voice, "and it forgot to take us with it." With this thought, he stood up and began the long hike back down the cliffs. Anita looked back after him for a long time. She shuddered. It as she hit bottom. Story 7. Safe. My mother loved me. From my first memory she was always there, pulling me out of harm's way. I was a curious child, and was constantly reaching for the hot stove or wandering outside unsupervised. Sometimes the harm she protected me from was my own father. Everything I said and did seemed to irritate him, and any loud noise or even a single word he perceived as disrespectful could earn a backhand across the face or a swift kick in the back to send you flying down the steps. I clung to her tightly in those years, as she was the only constant, never angry or impatient with me, but full of love and hope. She stood in between his hand and my fragile body, and I'm ashamed to say that I ran and hid more than once as he took his anger on my dear mother. My grandparents lived across town and were anxious for me to get of an age where I could spend the weekend or the summer. Most little boys would be excited about a weekend at his grandpa's aunt's, but I feared the time when I would be forced to endure the hard back-breaking summers my older cousins had seen. The grandparents thought that hard labor was the only way a boy would grow into a strong man, as they had a large farm to tend to. They made use of their grandsons by raising them for the better part of their childhood, usually starting around 5 or 6, depending on the constitution of the boy. My cousins slept in the leaky barn out back, and they existed on whatever scraps were thrown out at the end of the day. By the end of the summer they permeated an odor that may never wash off, an odor of sadness and pain. My female cousins lived inside the house and would never speak of the horrors they endured. Women weren't valued much in my family, except for one thing. When I was barely 5, my mother woke me up in the middle of the night, covering her hand across my mouth and signaling for me to keep quiet. Her bruised face was wet from tears, and her hand shook as she silently begged me not to do anything to attract the attention of my sleeping father. Without a sound, we snuck out of the house, taking only my stuffed teddy bear, leaving behind everything I had ever known. My mother and I kept to the back roads as we made our journey across several states to the house on the river where her brother lived. Her brother made his living as a teacher at the small schoolhouse in town, and was a widow with no children of his own. By the time we arrived at his door, we were weak from hunger and exhaustion. My mother hadn't stopped to sleep the whole way, too afraid that my father or his family would catch up with her unaware. My uncle hadn't always lived here, had arrived here only a few short months before, and as my mother had not been permitted to keep contact with her family, she knew of his location only by the chance meeting of a distant relative while selling some items in town. Even at my young age, I was able to understand that this meant we were safe. They couldn't find us here. Suddenly my world didn't look so bleak and depressing. I would no longer suffer my father's wrath for playing too loudly in the backyard or getting up to get a drink of water after I was supposed to be asleep. I suppose that given my history I should have been wary of this new man, but he exuded a calm demeanor, and my natural instincts told me that he would never hurt me. For 2 years my mother and I lived in peace in my uncle's house by the river. My mother started working at a small shop in town, and I went to school with my uncle. At night we would eat dinner in the small kitchen and talk about our day. I spent my summers down by the river, fishing or watching the grass grow. I developed a fast friendship with a boy down the road, and we never spent a weekend apart riding bikes and playing in the woods. It was a sweet time, the best of my childhood memories, but nothing good lasts forever. My mother took ill in the winter. I was 7. I was looking forward to Christmas and the break from school and sleepovers and late-night marshmallow roasting. But then my mother was sick, and everyone got very sad. It seemed only a week passed where she went from happy and rosy to pale and withdrawn in her bed. On the morning of the parade in town, I begged her to take me. My young mind didn't understand real sickness. I had recovered nicely from the years spent with my father, and was now blessed once again with the innocence and selfishness of youth. Mother P.U. led herself together, and off we went. She held my hand and bought me caramel popcorn at the stand. We laughed and giggled for a few minutes. She appeared healthy and whole again. Then she fell right there at the parade in front of everyone. My sweet, wonderful mother, who always protected me, fell to the pavement, and I only stared in confusion. My mother was rushed to the hospital in the next town, and I squeezed into a corner and cried silently. When the nurses came to me and asked me who my father was, what possessed me to utter his name? Why wouldn't I say the name of my quiet uncle at home at his house on the river? Shock, perhaps, and confusion. I didn't understand that they were asking who to call. No, I answered honestly, and off they went. The nurse pulled me into my mother's room and quietly told me my father and my grandparents were both on the way to claim me. My father to comfort me, and my grandparents to take me back to their farm to stay. What a lucky boy you are to have so many people who love you. You'll be just fine. But now you should stay with your mother for a few minutes and say your goodbyes. They will be here shortly. Inside I screamed in terror, wanting to run and hide. Get away from the miseries that were soon to come. But I couldn't leave my mother. I couldn't leave without saying goodbye. As I held my mother's hand to let a silent tear fall, she opened her eyes. She smiled so sweetly at me and said the words before she passed from this world. You're safe. My mother passed at the stroke of midnight, December 18th, the year I was 7. I curled up next to her body and didn't wake when my uncle scooped me in his arms and carried me home. I didn't know that day what had happened to the two different cars traveling towards me in the night to take me away to a terrible place. But I knew I was safe because my mother had told me so. I grew up in that house by the Ivor with my sweet, sweet uncle. When I was 10, he met a nice lady from town, and they married and had 2 children of their own. I was raised as another son, and I was always loved and cared for. Although my new aunt could never replace my darling mother, she took care of me throughout my childhood, and never was a word spoken in anger. Never did I sleep in the barn or live on scraps. Never did I have to duck to avoid the fist coming at me in the dark. My first year in college, I became curious about what had happened to change the events that were unfolding in my life on that awful night. I did some research, and this is what I learned. At midnight on December 18th, the year I was 7, my father was traveling from one place in his old blue pickup he had been working out of on when he received the message that his only son had been found. The pickup was old and in disrepair. Still, it was a surprise that at the stroke of midnight his truck suddenly swerved into the path of an oncoming semi, killing him instantly. The driver of the semi walked away with barely a scratch. At midnight on December 18th, the year I was 7, my grandparents were traveling from their farm across town in their new car, purchased in the last year with proceeds from the farm and apparently the prostitution of several of their own granddaughters. They were at home, and they received word that their grandson had been found. The car was new and not the cheapest model. Therefore it was a mystery why at the stroke of midnight the car suddenly pulled to the right while on a mountain road, causing the car to go through the weak fence and down into the ravine. My grandparents were killed instantly. There were investigations, even into my sweet, calm uncle, as it was found to be little odd that both of these events should happen at the exact time my mother passed from this world. My uncle never worried me with it, and the investigators finally gave up, as no one could ever prove how it happened. I know how it happened. My mother told me when she uttered those 2 words, "You're safe,"